Welcome. This is Najma Minhas with Global Village Space. I'm joined today by Sanjay Kapoor, the editor of Hard News, based in New Delhi. We're taking this opportunity to look at the Indian position on the Russia-Ukrainian crisis, the Indian missile that came over into Pakistani territory, which the Indian government has claimed was accidental misfiring, and finally a look at Kashmir Files, a controversial movie that's recently been launched in India, and the reaction from the right-wingers that we're getting from this movie. Sanjay, thank you so much for giving me time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sanjay, I'd like to start off with the Russia-Ukrainian crisis. How is this affecting India's foreign policy?
I think India's foreign policy is under enormous pressure, primarily because we took a stand in favor of Russia. Not really favor, but if you don't take sides, you seem to be favoring one against the other. We abstained thrice in the UN on resolutions which were supposed to pin Russia down. And we have even suggested to Russia, in fact, responded to Russia's offer to buy 3.5 billion worth of oil from them. They're giving us at a huge discount. All this is deeply resented by the US. United States of America and the Western allies are putting enormous pressure on India to take a stand to criticize Russia. But we haven't done that because we have old ties with Russia and its physical precursor, Soviet Union. In fact, Soviet Union time and again came to our rescue every time there was a crisis pertaining to Kashmir, or even when we had a scrap with our not so friendly neighbor Pakistan. And the fact of the matter is that we hold Soviet Union in very high esteem. Even when it came to the war against Pakistan in 1971, especially when it came to Bangladesh, Russia vetoed United States of America's effort to stop us from getting in. So those memories haven't really faded. And we think that at the time when India is at a point where it can help Russia, we don't want to be abandoning a friend. This point of view is not in any way seen very kindly by the US, although some US officials say that India's complicated relationship we tend to ignore, but we know that the India is in a certain way moving towards the West. But having said that,
point of view shared by the whole of India?
I mean, there hasn't been a survey. There hasn't been a real referendum on this, but the fact of the matter is that Russians are liked, and they are liked because they have contributed to helping us build power plants, steel plants, a number of IITs, IIMs, you name it. I mean, for instance, 1947, the Russians or Soviet Union have been involved in India's growth. It kind of slipped a bit when Soviet Union cracked up and Russia became a legatee of Soviet Union. And I think there was a certain resentment which was building up in the Russian government towards how India was looking more towards West than they were looking towards Russia. But it was quite logical because in a certain way, from the point of economy, Russia had diminished quite a bit. It no longer was a paramount power as it was in the early days. So it was logical that India moved in the other direction. But in the last few years, our relationship has become far more comprehensive. They are a very privileged partner, strategic privileged partners. In 2010, we chose to upgrade that relationship. We are buying equipment from them. We bought S-400. And which is something that really rankles United States of America. US, in fact, asked India to cancel that deal. We have, I think, delayed a few things here and there, but we persist on US 400, which we think is very important to take on China, with whom we are having a very troubled relationship at the border.
And you mentioned that you're receiving enormous pressure from the West with regard to what's happening right now, India's position on Russia-Ukraine. What kind of pressure has that been? Is it just been verbal, or have you seen anything other than that right now?
I mean, I'll give you an example.
Other than that?
No, I'll give you an example. Over the last few days, there have been too many visits which are happening, which were supposed to happen because COVID had kind of brought in restriction. Things are being, looking up. There's greater movement, but some of them are, just came up without any much fanfare. I mean, you had the Japanese Prime Minister coming in seemingly on an yearly summit. But as the Global Times of China describes him, he was actually a lobbyist for the US, pressuring India to fall in line when it came to the position held by other members of the Quad, which is a construct which came to take on China in the Indo-Pacific. So nothing really came out of India stood its ground. Now we learn that the Israeli Prime Minister wants to come, and surprisingly, surprises of all surprises, while the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Bennett, has been on social media saying that he's coming to meet his brother, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, there's been no reciprocation. More than 20 hours have elapsed since he very merrily sounded that, look, I'm coming, but nobody was willing to say that, okay, he's coming, let's talk about it, say for some TV channels which have been, very excited.
Sanjay, that's really interesting what you just highlighted. So you think there might not be bear hugs happening this time with the Israeli Prime Minister?
I'm not very sure whether he's coming, but the fact is that he's pushing very hard. So if he's not welcome, would he come? And if why is he not welcome? Because I think the BJP is so fond of Israel. They love that country and everything. And they think that India's situation is very similar to that of Israel, because they think that as Israel is surrounded by all the Muslim countries, India is surrounded by hostile neighbors, and some of them are Muslim countries. So they think that they have solutions for each other, that they can learn from each other. And now you have a situation that I'm coming, but he said, but the host is silent. So maybe things will really, maybe some kind of haze is going to clear after a while. Then you have Victoria Nuland, the Deputy Secretary of State from US, who wants to come. And she's no pushover. If you remember, Victoria Nuland was the one who actually brought down a pro-Russian government in Ukraine in 2014. When Yankovich was there, his government was pulled down. She was in fact distributing cakes in the Maidan of Kyiv. So she's coming here. I wonder why. There could have been other heads of state, other deputy secretary of states who could have come, but she's been dispatched. Then you have the Australian Prime Minister with whom we are going to have a virtual summit. There's been actually an avalanche of, you can say, foreign visits, phone calls, this, that, and the other. And surely the top of the agenda is Ukraine, and then followed by all kinds of promises of like $42 billion Japan is willing to offer. I don't know whether what they will give, whether it will be absorbed. I am not very sure, because they have made similar promises in the past. Last time they were giving $20 billion. I don't know how many billions came. Similarly, the Australians also offering some 1,500 crores, which is supposed to be the biggest deal that they have signed with anybody. But the idea is to get India on board on Ukraine when it comes to the West.
So you see this all as a result of India adopting an independent foreign policy?
I think that is the reason. I mean, what has really happened that India or Mr. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, despite his dislike for the first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, is going back to the non-aligned days, where he is supporting a strategic autonomy. Now it is called strategic autonomy. Earlier it was non-aligned, later it was called multi-aligned. But it is supporting a certain kind of independence in terms of choosing your own path. And we were all in India have been quite happy about the way Pakistan Prime Minister praised India's independent foreign policy yesterday in a public meeting, when he said that, India has done something which is remarkable and is followed an independent policy. And he wondered whether European Union envoys had the courage to pressurize India as they had done Pakistan. So there is appreciation all around for what kind of stand India is taking. But I'm sure it is not going down well with the President Biden of US, as well as many of the allies who have shown the kind of aggression which was absolutely unexpected during this Ukraine-Russia war. They want to put Russia in a corner. And the manner in which they have brought in sanction is going to destroy the interconnectedness of the globalization that had taken place in the last 20 years. And there is fear in many countries how it is all going to play out, because it's still early days. This isn't even a month since the war broke out. It was 24th of February. So it's not even really a month since it happened. So there are fears, I think, in India. There are in other countries also, like in Germany or Western Europe for that matter. They still use a lot of oil and gas, and there are no sanctions against them. So India, if it is buying oil from Russia, is raising this point that if the Europeans can buy oil, why can't a country like India, which is cash-strapped, which is energy-strapped, can buy oil from somebody who's giving a good discount?
Right. No, this is an interesting point. And then I wanted to ask you, what do you think, along with the cheaper oil that India is getting from Russia, there is also talk that India may start doing some kind of Russia-Ruble trade as well. I don't know, what is the likelihood of this happening in India, and what do you think there could be any potential ramifications from this?
So India and Soviet Union used to have a Rupee-Ruble arrangement, where because the Soviet Union was not allowed, their ruble was not integrated in the global market, the currency market, they used to swap, currencies. What would really happen that the Russians would have an account in an Indian bank, and the Indians will have an account in the foreign bank, and there will be a currency, transaction based on a notional amount of value. So they probably link it to a dollar or maybe euro or whatever, and then the transaction will take place. So something like this could happen primarily because you have the Russians have been removed from the SWIFT. They have been banned from dealing with the SWIFT, which normally go through global banking, and you could transact on that. So once the SWIFT has gone away, you have a situation where India, if it has to trade, if it has to buy oil or even S-400, they'll have to make payment in rupees. The same thing is happening between the Chinese and the Russians. You have the yuan arrangement which is taking place. So we might see the beginning of what is called the de-dollarization of the world economy. If you have 2 or 3 large economies suddenly waking up and saying that, look here, we don't need dollars as an intermediary currency or reserve currency. We will manage on our own. And so it could happen. For a short while, India was also trading with Iran because there were restrictions which were brought in by the US. And we had a real rupee swap arrangement where we would, exchange, and oil was to be paid. And the trade had gone up to almost $11 billion because before the Americans decided enough was enough and they should be stopped. And we came under pressure at that time. So that is how it happened.
So Sanjay, I wanted to ask you, how does India view the potentially closer relationship of the Russian and the Chinese? I mean, I know that at the beginning of February, during the Winter Olympics, when Putin went there, they said there's no limits to this friendship. And of course, now that Russia's under sanctions, there is this whole theory that, of course, China will help it out. How is India viewing this relationship?
So, this is a very, very technical question for a lot of Indians. In fact, India doesn't want to get pressured by the US to, take sides or to antagonize China for that matter. So even when we became members of the Quad at the insistence of US, as part of a grand design that, the Indo-Pacific is in place and the big enemy is China, when there is should be an attempt to serve as a countervailing force, as a counterpoint to the Chinese expansion. India had its reservation. They said they didn't want the Quad to militarize. And it was seen as more as a coming together of 3 or 4 powers to take on disasters and climate change and this, that, and the other. For a brief while, when President Trump was in power and you had Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, they made it very clear that it's a military construct that made India very uneasy. So in 2020, just around the time when the elections were taking place in the US, there was a scrap between India and China, and largely because I think there were misgivings on what exactly was happening with India, and was India joining or becoming a part of a military alliance, despite the fact India refused and denied that they had anything to do with the US when it came to military alliance. China wasn't really convinced. So I think there is a problem. There is a border which is shared between India and China, which is 3,500 kilometers, and that border is most of it is unmarked. So there is a lot of salami slicing which is taking place. Chinese have been accused of taking in India's territory. Similarly, India has also claimed that they have never been, holding themselves back. But that is a scrap which has not been sorted out as yet. India has used the presence of Russia for, in certain ways, sorting out or as a hedge against China. And Russia is also keen that the India-China relationship remains cool and they don't really flare up, because Russia is of the belief that if there is a scrap or differences between India and China, the biggest gainer would be the West. And Russia wants that kind of thing to stop, because They believe that the Atlantic Alliance in a certain way controls world narrative, and they are the ones who are trying to stop the Asian and Eurasian powers to, do pretty much what they want in trying to pull them back. So there are many things which are playing out during this Ukraine crisis, and India, Russia, China, the RIC countries as it is called, are trying to see whether they can work together. Foreign Minister Wang is coming on the 26th or 27th to Delhi, which is a very, very significant visit in my reckoning, primarily because Chinese have no love lost with India. Similarly in India, you have channels, TV channels, you have media, you have all kinds of experts who are spewing venom all the time against China. And that is not going to be of India's interest, primarily because if you decide to take on the West, or if you take an independent line on West, you need help, you need support. And China is offering, whether we like it or not. So it's a moment of major reckoning that which side will we take? It's a time where we can't afford to be neutral. So if we decide to go in RIC or Russia, India, China kind of arrangement, which is a breakaway of the BRICS that has been formed some years ago, then there are going to be repercussions. I don't know how US is going to react to it, but India is in a very unenviable position.
Okay, that's very interesting because given the fact that India and China don't have the best of relations right now, but you're still saying there's a potential alliance of interest. We'll talk more about that on another issue, but this time I just want to focus a little bit more on the Russia-India angle. So given the fact that you mentioned long history that India has with Russia, and in 2010 they signed this special and strategic cooperative partnership, how does India's increasing role in Quad fit into that relationship?
So I don't think Russia and China are comfortable with India becoming partner of a member of the Quad. They have made it amply clear that they are very uncomfortable. And although Russia doesn't buy the construct which has emanated from China, as early, or you can say as recent as the Chinese Deputy Foreign Minister Ye Liuchang saying yesterday that Quad is like an Asian NATO, and its membership could have a response which is very similar to how Russia has responded to Ukraine. So this is a threat in a certain way. It is a threat of how your Quad is being interpreted. This is despite the fact that Mr. Jaishankar, who's a foreign minister, has made it amply clear that it is not a military relationship. We've got no military alliance and blah blah. But Chinese are not convinced. They think that US is driving it. US is all the time in their reckoning a country that cannot be taken for granted. They have their agendas. In fact, Mr. Li Chuching has come out with a more granular formulation of small groupings that have been built in the Indo-Pacific, which put China under pressure. And he thinks that everything that is being created in Indo-Pacific is meant to reign in China. So how do you disabuse Beijing's view on Quad? How do you disabuse Beijing's entire perception about why it has been formed? That will be a challenge for India. And if Mr. Wang is coming to India to figure out whether there's a possibility of having a deepening relationship, and because they think that we are at the point where we can depart from the US controlled, the alliance at the moment. And if that happens, then you have an interesting world order taking shape.
Okay, one of the points that people are mentioning is the fact that that India's relationship with Russia is also a function of the fact that it imports 50 to 60% of its military arms from Russia. It's extremely dependent on Russia for the maintenance of old arms, which are 80 to 85% of the army. And if we had not had this dependence, then India could more easily move towards the West. So what I'd like to ask you is, if India was part of this AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US strategic relationship, the defense relationship that started, do you think that argument would hold, that India is more beholden to Russia, more taking Russia aside because of the arms relationship?
India, the entire weaponry that India holds, about 85% comes from Russia. Although our dependence is reduced quite a bit, it's come down to about 35, 38%. But having said that, we require spare parts, we require all kinds of support in case we have a two-front war. And if we are not having a regular supply of weapons from Russia, I can assure you that things are going to be very bad for India, and there would be nobody who could be coming to our rescue. So we are cognizant of that. And I've been reading some of the parliamentary committees which have been especially on defense. And there was one particular committee which said that if spare parts for Su-30, which is a Russian aircraft, don't come in quickly, almost 25, 30 aircrafts which are on the ground will remain there, and it will cause a certain kind of vulnerability in our strategic response. And so it was imperative that the spare parts are brought in and things are put in shape. So in a certain way, Russia is very, very important, at least in the transition for the next 5-10 years. And that is the reason why India never decided to be part of AUKUS. I mean, AUKUS in a certain way bailed out India, although the hawks in India thought that
Were you
India
even
is,
offered? Were you offered to be part of it?
Sorry?
Were you even offered a position in the AUKUS?
We were not, but the fact of the matter is it's a formation which took us by surprise. We thought that we were the chosen one, and although we were most ambivalent about it, and I think the US also recognized that India cannot in a certain way deliver what they want, because we are the only country that is sharing 3,500 kilometers of border, and we had major issues with them, and we were not in a position to take on China. China is a different world, it's a world power, it's about $17 trillion economy, and we are struggling to reach 3 trillion. So let's be realistic, although we may do a lot of chest thumping and all that, but there is a big gap between the two of them, and they're growing in terms of their technology, about their equipment, about even reordering the army in a speed that is unimaginable. Their surveillance technology is phenomenal, and they are trying to give US a run for its money. I think there is recognition in Washington that the Chinese that they have to take on in the coming days, and India could, despite the fact that we have historically, civilizationally competed with each other, but it's a different league altogether.
Right, very interesting. So now, Sanjay, I'd like us to switch over to the interesting, the accidental misfiring of the missile that came into Pakistan, which the Indian government claimed was accidental misfiring. I'd like to get your take on that. I mean, what is Indian media asking the government? Are they asking them questions? Are they saying, why did this happen? How did this happen between two nuclear-armed nations? I mean, we couldn't take this risk. What kind of questions are being asked by the media from the government?
Surprisingly, not really hard questions. People aren't really talking about it. I mean, there was, I think, certain bewilderment in people who don't really understand this kind of thing, but everybody accepted the government point of view that it was actually a misfiring. And I think even a global response was in line with what India has been saying. The US agreed with our point of view, and so did many others. Save for, I think, a question being raised by the Pakistan, which obviously they had every right to do it. And maybe not even China. I mean, I've been following Global Times, and there's in the passing, they raised about the questions pertaining to misfiring, but it has been rather muted.
I think they've said
Indian
that
media doesn't depart with.
I think China has said they support Pakistan's view that we should have a joint probe on this.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you're saying that.
But they were not scandalized. They were not scandalized. There was no outrage that as to how this could have happened.
Right.
So because nothing happened like this in India, there hasn't been enough analysis. There's not been real discussion on this. Okay, but having said that, it's bewildering. Although cases of misfiring historically have been reported. I was reading an article by a friend, Christopher Clary, in The War on the Rocks, and this is not the first incident of misfiring. They have similar things that have happened. So anyways,
but
I'm no defense expert, and I don't want to get in.
Do you not think the Indian population is worried by the fact that, this tech, even if it was an accidental misfiring, we're not disputing that right now. What we're talking about is the fact that this
worry, Najma, is that Pakistan has a second strike capability.
Right.
And if the assurance had not gone, or if their own investigation had not proved that it actually was a botched up affair, the damn thing didn't blow up, and they had actually pressed the button and it would have flown in India's direction, we don't know the kind of human tragedy that would have unfolded.
Yeah.
But the enormity of that accident is not being, has not registered. People have not even begun to understand that, we have just escaped a major, great tragedy.
And we were lucky that there wasn't tensions in the air at the time. Do you know if any kind of accountability within the government or the army structure has taken place? Has anybody been fired? Has anybody had to resign as a result of this?
Najman, nothing as yet. I think the government has announced a court of inquiry. And once the report of the court of inquiry is submitted, maybe something will happen. But as of now, nothing. And we have to wait. I mean, the fact of the matter is that India and Pakistan, this entire was saved from a tragedy. And it was actually, the fact is the government saying it's an accident, accidents do happen. Then we were saved from this tragedy, and world's attention would have shifted from Ukraine to something far more disastrous that would have unfolded. So God has been kind.
Yeah. No, thank God, God has been kind. Okay, well, I'd like us to move towards Kashmir Files. It's a movie that's recently been released in India, and it's creating a lot of controversy within India as well as Pakistan about the way that Kashmiri Pandits' killings have been portrayed. I've read an article on The Wire which said that it was basically a manipulative propaganda vehicle, whose aim was to rouse motions against Muslims. The Prime Minister himself, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has praised this movie and criticized the critics for not understanding it. But the movie has said that 4,000 Kashmiri Pandits were killed during the 1990s, 1989 to 1990 period, whereas government's own figures say around 200. So what do you think the purpose of this movie was? I mean, is it to drive a certain agenda?
I mean, the truth is that there has been a very competing point of view in Kashmir. You have the supporters of the BJP and who think that a major tragedy took place. Actually, any war or conflict that drives people from their homes is a tragedy. We are seeing one unfold in Ukraine. Something similar may have happened, not of that dimension, but surely. But there is a certain history which is being blocked out by the film, and the film makes it very clear that it's a work of fiction. So I don't know whether we need to discuss so much of passion what is being portrayed in a work of fiction, because the start of the film is showing that work of fiction and nothing to suggest that anybody living or dead has anything to do with it. But having said that, it has got the endorsement from the party in power. The Prime Minister himself has led in backing it. It has made 100 crores in a matter of very short time, the film. It might go far more. A lot of state governments are waiving entertainment tax, and a lot of people have been praising for, I mean, there's a generational issue. The new generation doesn't have a clue on what happened in Kashmir. So they will take everything that the government is providing because they take things at face value.
Right. So,
but since the 1990s right to now.
As you mentioned, the new generation has no clue because, of course, they were born after that. But the movie, I mean, while it's a fiction movie, it doesn't talk about the mass graves that Muslims were killed. The hundreds of thousands that's alleged that have disappeared in Kashmir on the Muslim side. So there just seems to be a certain agenda that it wants to drive forward. And then the reaction that you've seen to this movie, I mean, there are videos flying around in social media where Hindu right-wing men had said, we need to go into Kashmir and marry these women, and we will, within less than a generation, change the demographics of this. So that is the reaction that we've had to the movie. So the movie is significant, whether it was a fiction or not, in terms of what kind of...
I entirely agree with you. I entirely agree with you. In normal circumstances, a film like this should not have been allowed by the censor board if it was provocative or something that would cause, turmoil in the society. But having said that, it's in a different world where there is no space for plurality, there's no space for the other point of view, and there's only one point which has been hammered. Even before the program started, We were talking about how the majoritarian view is the one which is being peddled all the time, and similarly with history. And it has been resented. It's not that it's not been resented. One of the chief ministers of the state of Chhattisgarh, he has been very critical. He says that he went to see the movie, but came back saying that the facts have been distorted. And others also saying the same thing. But the truth is that it has the endorsement of the government, and the government, whoever is in power, ends up controlling the truth and what.
Do you see this as an attempt by the government to produce communal disharmony, or is it an attempt by the government to put down the Congress government? Because there's also a suggestion in the movie that had Article 370 been removed a lot earlier, we wouldn't have seen this. And the movie criticizes the Congress party as well.
I haven't seen the movie, so I'm not in a position to really go into these details. But at the face of it, whatever I have read or how the BJP goes about campaigning, their prime target is Congress. And as I was saying earlier, that they make an attempt to de-Nehruize the entire country in a certain way, run down his achievements. All that has been happening. I mean, what I'm saying is nothing new. But bringing in this Kashmir Files also seeks to give legitimacy to what was done in August 5th, 2019, when Article 370 was revoked, abrogated, and you had 35A also removed, and the status of Kashmir had been changed. So this is a point where a lot of discussion has been taking place, although most of the political parties are silent on this. Many of them support it, but it's a civil society which has been raising it time and again. Tragically, the matter has never been brought up in any of the courts in India. It has been postponed. There have been 250, 300 habeas corpus which haven't been taken up. So Kashmir File is just one more thing that has been added. There are far more burning issues which have been happening in Kashmir post August 5th, 2009. And we don't really know much about it. So the thing is that Kashmir Files is provocative, but I'm sure it's a film. It will just go away if it is not backed by any kind of, you can say, provocative action by interested groups.
Right. Sanjay, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.